Life has a way of testing our patience, especially when it comes to creativity. There are days when we feel unstoppable, when ideas pour out of us effortlessly and the work seems almost to create itself. But more often than not, we face the opposite. The blank page, the stalled canvas, the feeling that we've lost our spark. Austin Kleon, in his book Keep Going, understands this deeply. His message is both comforting and practical. Creativity isn't about chasing sudden inspiration or waiting for some mystical breakthrough. It's about persistence, routine, and the courage to keep showing up even when nothing seems to be working. Instead of glamorizing the rare moments of genius, Kleon reminds us that the true heart of creativity lies in the ordinary days, the ones where progress is invisible but still happening beneath the surface. He introduces the idea that every day is Groundhog Day, borrowing the metaphor from the classic film, in which the main character wakes up to relive the same day over and over. For many people, this sounds like a nightmare. We crave novelty and excitement, so repetition feels boring, even suffocating. But Kleon flips the script. He argues that repetition isn't something to run from. It's the foundation of creative work. If you examine the lives of great artists, musicians, and thinkers, you'll find that they all had routines, sometimes rigid ones. Beethoven took long walks every afternoon. Maya Angelou rented hotel rooms where she wrote from morning until early afternoon. Haruki Murakami famously follows a strict daily schedule of writing, running, and reading. What these examples reveal is that repetition doesn't kill creativity. It sustains it. Routine is not the enemy. It's the quiet structure that holds the chaos of inspiration together. Think of creativity like tending a garden. A gardener doesn't show up expecting miracles every day. They don't plant a seed in the soil and demand a flower by tomorrow. Instead, they water, weed, nurture, and trust the process. They show up when it's sunny, and they show up when it rains. Sometimes weeks pass with no visible growth. But underground, roots are forming, strengthening, preparing for what's to come. Creative work follows the same principle. We may not see results immediately, but each day we show up, we lay another brick in the foundation of our practice. And if we're consistent, one day we look up and realize we built something lasting. Kleon emphasizes that boredom is not the enemy either. In fact, boredom can be fertile ground for creativity. In our modern world, we're conditioned to avoid stillness at all costs. Every time we feel restless, we reach for our phones, scroll through feeds, or distract ourselves with noise. But boredom creates space for ideas to bubble up. When the mind is unoccupied, it wanders, connects dots, and invents. By embracing the monotony of daily routines, we give ourselves a chance to stumble into unexpected insights. Instead of resisting the cycle of ordinary days, we should lean into them, treating each one as a chance to practice again, to start again, to keep going. This rhythm also teaches us humility. Not every day will produce brilliance. Some days, the work will feel dull, uninspired, or even pointless. But those days matter as much as the productive ones. Kleon reminds us that showing up on the bad days is what makes the good days possible. Creativity is not a straight climb up a mountain. It's more like the tide, flowing in and out. If you abandon your work every time the tide goes out, you'll never see the treasures it brings back in. The key is to remain steady, to keep faith in the process, to trust that if you show up with honesty and patience, progress will come. There's also a psychological relief in routines. When you remove the constant question of when or how you will work, you save energy for the work itself. Deciding in advance to write every morning at 7 or to draw for an hour each night before bed creates a container that eliminates unnecessary decision-making. Instead of waiting for the perfect moment or ideal conditions, you already know when and where you'll work. This habit turns creativity from something mysterious into something reliable. Over time, that reliability becomes a source of strength because you know you can count on yourself to keep going, even when inspiration is nowhere to be found. Kleon's vision of Groundhog Day, creativity may not sound glamorous, but it's deeply empowering. It's a reminder that you don't need to reinvent yourself every day, nor do you need to create masterpieces constantly. What matters is continuity, the discipline to return to your tools again and again, regardless of results. By accepting the cyclical nature of life and work, you free yourself from unrealistic expectations. You stop waiting for perfect conditions and instead find meaning in the act of doing itself. So, when you wake up tomorrow and the blank page feels heavy, remember, you don't need to produce brilliance. You don't need to outdo yourself or impress anyone. All you need to do is return to your practice, like the gardener tending their soil, like the musician rehearsing scales, like the writer jotting down one imperfect sentence at a time. The repetition may feel mundane, but hidden within it is the secret to longevity. It's not the dramatic breakthroughs that sustain creative lives, but the steady hum of daily work. That's the heart of Kleon's message in this first principle. Creativity isn't a destination you arrive at, but practice you commit to over and over again. To keep going, you don't need to do everything. You just need to show up today, and then tomorrow, and then the next day. And in the end, those small, ordinary days will add up to an extraordinary body of work. Another cornerstone lesson in Keep Going is Austin Kleon's call to create what he calls a bliss station. At first, the phrase sounds poetic, almost whimsical, but its meaning is deeply practical and vital for any creative life. A bliss station is not necessarily a physical studio with perfect lighting and inspiring decor, though it can be if you have the space and resources. More importantly, it is any space, mental, emotional, or physical, that you deliberately carve out to reconnect with yourself and your work, free from the demands and distractions of the outside world. In an era where our attention is pulled in 100 directions by buzzing phones, endless notifications, and a constant flood of news, this advice is revolutionary in its simplicity. Find a place where you can be undisturbed and go there regularly to nourish your inner life. Kleon reminds us that creativity requires both attention and protection. Without a place to protect our attention, we become like leaves blown around by the winds of distraction. Think about how easily a single notification derails you. You sit down to write, and a message pops up. You tell yourself you'll just glance at it, but 15 minutes later you're lost in an endless scroll of updates, photos, and opinions. The problem isn't just lost time. It's that the fragile thread of concentration has been broken. Creativity thrives on depth, on being able to sink into flow, and the modern world constantly threatens that depth. A bliss station, whether the quiet desk, a park bench, or simply a corner of your room, acts as a shield against these forces. It becomes a sanctuary where your mind can breathe, where ideas have space to stretch, and where your creative spirit is safe from interruption. But Kleon emphasizes that a bliss station is more than a place. It's also about boundaries. In order to retreat into this sanctuary, you must learn the art of saying no. No to unnecessary obligations. No to social media binges. No to toxic relationships that drain your energy instead of fueling it. The creative life requires conservation of energy, and too often we give our best hours to things that don't matter. Imagine your energy as water in a jar. Every distraction is a hole poked in the jar, slowly draining you until nothing is left for your work. By intentionally guarding your bliss station, you patch those holes and keep your energy where it belongs. This doesn't mean you have to isolate yourself completely or reject the world. On the contrary, a healthy balance between engagement and retreat is essential. The point is not to escape life, but to create rhythms that give your creativity room to thrive. Kleon suggests building small rituals that signal your entrance into this protected space. Maybe it's lighting a candle, turning off your phone, or brewing a cup of tea before you sit down to create. These rituals act like a threshold, helping your brain shift gears from the noise of the outside world to the quiet of your inner world. Over time, they become powerful triggers that condition your mind to enter a state of focus more quickly. It's also important to remember that bliss stations look different for everyone. For some, it's a literal studio with paint splattered floors. For others, it's a simple notebook carried everywhere. For a busy parent, it might even be the 15 minutes of solitude found late at night after the kids are asleep. What matters is not the size or location of the space, but the intention behind it. Your bliss station is sacred precisely because you choose to make it so. By returning to it again and again, you reinforce the message that your creative work is worthy of attention and that your inner life deserves protection. Kleon also points out that these stations are not permanent. They may evolve as your life changes. A young artist in their 20s may find bliss in a crowded cafe filled with the energy of strangers, while a parent of 3 may need silence and solitude more than anything else. The form shifts, but the principle remains the same. Creativity requires a home. Without a place to go, your ideas risk being suffocated by the demands of daily life. With a place to go, you give those ideas a chance to breathe, grow, and take shape. This lesson carries a deeper symbolic meaning as well. In a culture that worships productivity and busyness, choosing to create a bliss station is an act of resistance. It's a way of saying, my inner life matters. My creativity is not a hobby squeezed into leftover time. It is something I value enough to protect. By making space for stillness and reflection, you're declaring that not everything has to be loud, fast, or shared online. Some things are meant to be quiet, slow, and private. And it is often in these private spaces that the most authentic and meaningful work is born. So, when Kleon urges us to build a bliss station, he is giving us a tool for survival. Creativity cannot flourish if we are constantly distracted, depleted, or disconnected from ourselves. But when we retreat to a space that feels safe and nourishing, we recharge our minds and reconnect with the joy of making. The world may be chaotic, but in your bliss station, you find clarity. The world may demand your attention, but in your bliss station, you reclaim it. Over time, this practice becomes not just a habit, but a lifeline, an anchor that keeps you grounded no matter how turbulent life becomes. In the end, a bliss station is a reminder that creativity is not just about producing things for the world. It's about nurturing your relationship with yourself. It's about building a sanctuary where your imagination can play without judgment, where your curiosity can roam without interruption, and where your spirit can find rest. Without such spaces, burnout becomes inevitable. With them, you discover not just the ability to keep going, but the joy of continuing. Kleon's message here is clear and profound. If you want to sustain a creative life, protect your energy, guard your attention, and make space for your inner world. Only then will you have the strength and clarity to bring your outer work into the world. One of the most liberating and practical lessons in Keep Going is Austin Kleon's encouragement to forget the noun and do the verb. At first glance, it might sound like wordplay, but it's a profound shift in how we approach creativity. Too often, people paralyze themselves with the pressure of labels and identities. They ask, am I really an artist? Am I a real writer? Do I deserve to call myself a musician, a photographer, a designer? These questions weigh heavily on anyone trying to create. They feed insecurity and make the act of creation feel like an identity test you must pass before you're allowed to participate. Kleon argues that this way of thinking is completely backward. Instead of worrying about whether or not you are a noun, a writer, an artist, a creator, you should simply focus on doing the verb: writing, painting, playing, designing. When you concentrate on the act itself, you bypass the trap of labels and return to the joy of making. This advice may sound simple, but it can completely change how you see yourself. Imagine a young writer who hesitates to call herself a writer because she hasn't been published. She sits on her ideas, waiting for permission, waiting for validation, waiting for someone to officially grant her the identity she longs for. Meanwhile, the act of writing gets delayed, avoided, postponed indefinitely. But what happens if she takes Kleon's advice? If she stops worrying about the noun writer and simply writes every day with no concern about whether it's good or publishable, she may discover that the act itself is enough, that in doing the verb, she becomes a noun by default. You don't earn the right to be called a painter by waiting. You become a painter the moment you pick up a brush and apply color to canvas. You don't become a musician by waiting for a record deal. You become one by playing your instrument. The label follows the action, not the other way around. This perspective is incredibly freeing because it removes the need for external validation. Too often we wait for others to crown us with a title before we feel legitimate. But Kleon argues that legitimacy is a trap. If you love to write, you're a writer. If you love to take photos, you're a photographer. If you draw, you're an artist. The world doesn't need to approve before you engage with the work you love. By shifting from noun to verb, you reclaim the power to define yourself through action. There's also a deeper psychological benefit to this mindset. When you obsess over being a writer or an artist, you start to measure your worth by external markers. How many followers you have, how many sales you made, how much recognition you received. This creates a constant cycle of comparison and disappointment. But when you focus on the verb, on the act of writing, painting, or playing, you recenter your attention on the process. The process is within your control. You can't control how the world responds, but you can control whether you sit down to work today. You can control whether you pick up your pen or your guitar. This focus on process rather than identity not only reduces anxiety, it also keeps you moving forward. Kleon gives examples of how this shift in mindset has fueled countless creative lives. Think about the greats. Musicians who played long before they ever got on stage, writers who filled journals long before they were published, painters who spent years sketching before ever exhibiting their work. None of them waited for permission to begin. They did the work first, and the titles came later. And even after success, many of them continued to resist labels. They knew that labels create boxes, and boxes can limit growth. Once you define yourself too rigidly as one thing, you risk ignoring opportunities to evolve into something else. But if you focus on the verb, on doing, you remain open, flexible, alive to possibility. Consider how children approach creativity. A child never stops to ask, "Am I an artist?" They simply draw. They don't hesitate to call themselves a musician as they bang on pots and pans. They don't pause to wonder if they're real. They simply do the thing with joy and abandon. Kleon encourages us to return to that childlike attitude. Forget about legitimacy. Forget about titles. Forget about impressing anyone else. Just do the work. Play, explore, create. Let the doing itself be the proof of who you are. This approach is especially powerful when facing creative blocks. When you're stuck, identity-driven thinking often makes things worse. You might say to yourself, "A real writer wouldn't struggle this much, or if I were truly an artist, I'd have more ideas." These thoughts spiral into self-doubt and paralysis. But if you adopt Kleon's mindset, you cut through the noise. You stop worrying about being a writer and instead ask yourself, can I write one sentence today? Can I draw one sketch? Can I play one song? The bar becomes lower, the pressure lighter, and momentum returns. By focusing on the verb, you reclaim the joy of small actions, which accumulate into progress. Kleon's advice also applies to people outside traditional creative fields. Think of entrepreneurship, teaching, or even parenting. Too often we get caught up in labels. Am I really a leader? Am I truly successful? Instead of focusing on actions. Leadership is not a title. It's the act of leading. Success is not an identity. It's built in the daily habits of persistence, discipline, and learning. By turning verbs into habits, we cultivate identities naturally without the weight of expectation. Ultimately, Kleon's principle of forget the noun, do the verb, is a reminder to stay grounded. Creativity is not about being seen as something. It's about doing something. It's about the joy of process, the discipline of practice, and the humility of action. When you let go of labels and lean into verbs, you liberate yourself from fear of judgment. You give yourself permission to create freely, to explore without pressure, to grow without boundaries. And in that freedom, you rediscover the energy to keep going. Another profound lesson in keep going is the idea of making gifts, not just things to be sold. In our current world, it is almost impossible to escape the pressure of monetization. Every hobby, every talent, every little spark of creativity is often viewed through the lens of how it can be turned into income, exposure, or personal branding. We live in an age where even hobbies are turned into side hustles, where the joy of making is often overshadowed by the question, how can I market this? How can I sell this? How can I make it valuable in the eyes of others? Austin Kleon invites us to push back against that mindset. He reminds us that creativity has always been, at its core, an act of generosity. Long before there were galleries, publishers, streaming platforms, or algorithms, people made art as gifts to share with family, friends, and communities. The point wasn't profit. The point was connection, joy, and meaning. When you create with the intention of giving rather than selling, something magical happens. The pressure eases. You're no longer calculating likes, views, or sales. You are simply making something to brighten another person's day, to express your feelings, or to honor a moment. Think of the handwritten letter you tuck into a book and give to a friend, the homemade birthday card made with markers and love, the playlist you curate for someone who's going through a hard time, or the meal you cook with care and share at the table. None of these things are meant to make money. They are gifts, and their value lies in the act of giving. Kleon insists that keeping the spirit alive is essential for sustaining creativity. When everything we do is tied to metrics and monetization, burnout is inevitable. We begin to measure our worth by numbers on a screen. How many followers, how many sales, how much engagement. And when those numbers don't meet expectations, we feel as though our creativity has failed. But creativity isn't supposed to be a transaction. It's supposed to be an act of love. Making something as a gift breaks us free from the transactional mindset. It reminds us why we started creating in the first place, not for money or fame, but because making things felt good, because sharing them brought joy, because it was a way of connecting with other human beings. Kleon also highlights how gift-making fosters community. When we create without expecting payment, we open ourselves up to genuine connection. A poem written for a friend, a sketch sent in the mail, a song shared freely. All of these things deepen relationships in ways money never could. They remind us that art is not just a commodity, but a form of human conversation. In many cultures, creative gifts have long been at the center of life. Songs sung at gatherings, quotes made by families, dances performed for festivals. These traditions weren't about markets or fame. They were about belonging. Kleon urges us to reconnect with that tradition. By making gifts, we reaffirm that our creativity is bigger than commerce. It is about the threads that tie us to one another. Of course, Kleon is not saying we should never sell our work or that earning a living from creativity is wrong. But he is pointing out that if the balance tips too far toward money, the spirit of the work gets lost. The healthiest creative lives find ways to protect spaces where making is still pure, playful, and generous. Even if you sell your art professionally, you can still set aside time to create something just for the joy of giving it away. Maybe you sketch little doodles for your children's lunch boxes, or you write a story for a friend, or you bake bread to share with neighbors. These simple acts keep your creative spirit alive, even when the business side feels exhausting. Kleon also stresses that gifts don't have to be perfect. In fact, imperfection often makes them more meaningful. A clumsy drawing, a slightly off-key song, a handmade craft. These things carry the warmth of human touch. They are reminders that creativity is not about flawless execution, but about sincere expression. Too often, the pursuit of perfection paralyzes us. But when we think in terms of gifts, we let go of that burden. The point is not to impress. The point is to connect. And in that shift, we rediscover freedom. Another hidden benefit of gift-making is that it nurtures gratitude. When you create a gift, you are not only giving something outward, you're also reminding yourself of the people, places, and relationships that inspire you. You begin to notice more reasons to create, more opportunities to share, more sources of joy. This attitude of gratitude transforms the creative process into a cycle of generosity. The more you give, the more you notice to be thankful for, and the more ideas naturally arise. Perhaps most importantly, Kleon's lesson on gifts helps us keep going when motivation fades, when the pressure of performance or profit feels heavy. Shifting focus back to generosity lightens the load. If you don't feel like writing today, maybe you can write a note to a friend. If painting feels too big, maybe you can doodle a small picture for someone you love. These acts might seem small, but they carry the power to rekindle your energy. They remind you that creativity isn't always about large projects or big audiences. It can be as simple as bringing a smile to one person's face. In the end, making gifts is not just about the objects we create. It's about the mindset we cultivate. It's about resisting the reduction of art into mere commerce. It's about protecting the playfulness, generosity, and humanity at the heart of creativity. By making gifts, we sustain ourselves. We keep our hearts open, our spirits light, and our creativity flowing. We remind ourselves that art at its best is not about ownership, but about sharing. And in this sharing, we find the strength, joy, and purpose to keep going. One of the most reassuring lessons in Keep Going is a reminder that art and creativity don't always have to be grand, original, or revolutionary. In fact, Kleon insists that much of the best creative work comes from ordinary life, from paying attention to the world right in front of us. We live in a culture that constantly glorifies originality. We're told to think outside the box, to be innovative, to come up with something the world has never seen before. While that ambition can be inspiring, it can also be crippling. The pressure to be original often freezes people in place. They don't start because they fear they have nothing unique to offer. Kleon pushes back against this myth of originality. He argues that what matters most is not being the first to say something, but finding an authentic way to express it through your own lens. This perspective is incredibly freeing. Instead of chasing uniqueness, you can focus on honesty. Instead of worrying about whether your work will stand out, you can concentrate on whether it feels true to you. Consider music. There are only so many chords, and yet generation after generation creates new songs from the same patterns. The magic lies not in inventing completely new sounds, but in expressing timeless emotions in ways that resonate with today's listeners. The same is true for writing, painting, filmmaking, or any other art form. We are all drawing from the same shared human experiences: love, loss, hope, fear, joy, wonder. What makes your work meaningful is not that it's unprecedented, but that it carries your voice, your perspective, your lived reality. Kleon emphasizes that paying attention is at the heart of this. Creativity doesn't always require exotic adventures or rare inspiration. Often, it emerges from the smallest details of daily life. The way light falls through your window in the morning, the overheard conversation in a cafe, the rhythm of footsteps on a quiet street. These seemingly ordinary moments contain infinite material if we learn to notice them. The practice of noticing, of slowing down and being present, transforms the mundane into inspiration. And the more you practice paying attention, the more you realize the world is overflowed with ideas waiting to be captured. This lesson ties back to Kleon's earlier idea of routine. When you show up consistently, you give yourself more opportunities to notice. A writer who carries a notebook every day will accumulate dozens of observations, fragments, and ideas. A photographer who takes her camera on daily walks will capture details most of us overlook. Over time, these small acts of noticing add up, becoming raw material for larger works. And here's the beauty. None of these observations need to be original in the conventional sense. What matters is the perspective you bring to them. 1,000 people may have seen the same sunset, but only you can describe what it meant to you in that moment. Kleon also challenges the obsession with mastery. Many people hesitate to share their work because they feel it isn't perfect or polished enough. But waiting for perfection is a trap. The act of sharing, even in small, humble ways, creates connection. Sometimes it's the imperfect, vulnerable pieces of work that resonate most deeply with others. Think about the songs where the singer's voice cracks, or the essays that reveal raw honesty rather than polished wisdom. These works endure not because they are flawless, but because they are real. Kleon's advice is to embrace imperfection and keep creating anyway. By doing so, you stay in motion, and motion is what keeps you going. Another key point Kleon raises is the danger of comparison. When you focus too much on originality, you inevitably compare yourself to others. You look at what they're doing and think, they're more unique, more talented, more successful. This mindset drains energy and steals joy. Instead, Kleon suggests redirecting your focus inward. Ask yourself, what can I notice today? What small truth can I capture? What little piece of the world feels worth recording? By centering your attention on observation and expression rather than competition, you reclaim the joy of making. Kleon also reminds us that art doesn't have to solve big problems or change the world to be worthwhile. Sometimes, its role is simply to bring a moment of beauty, comfort, or laughter. A small sketch can brighten someone's day. A silly doodle can relieve stress. A heartfelt note can strengthen a friendship. These things may not be revolutionary, but they are deeply human, and they matter. When we let go of the pressure to be monumental, we give ourselves permission to enjoy the process again. Think of creativity as a conversation rather than a performance. You don't need to say something the world has never heard before. You just need to add your voice to the ongoing dialogue of human expression. Every piece of art is part of a larger tapestry, woven together by generations. By contributing your thread, you keep the conversation alive. And when you see creativity this way, the fear of not being original disappears. You realize your job is not to reinvent everything, but to keep the thread moving forward. This perspective is perhaps the greatest relief for anyone who feels paralyzed by the myth of originality. You don't need to create something earth-shattering every time you sit down to work. You just need to pay attention, capture what resonates with you, and share it sincerely. Some days, that might mean writing a profound essay. Other days, it might mean sketching a doodle or humming a tune. All of it counts. All of it matters. Because in the act of making, you are keeping yourself connected to life, to others, and to your own creative spirit. So, Kleon's lesson here is simple but powerful. Stop worrying about being original. Start noticing the world around you. Trust that your perspective is enough. By focusing on the process of observation and honest expression, you remove the paralyzing weight of expectations. You rediscover the joy of small creations. And most importantly, you give yourself the strength to keep going. Not because you produce something revolutionary, but because you stayed true to the practice of creating in your own voice, one day at a time. As Keep Going comes to a close, Austin Kleon delivers a message that feels both gentle and powerful. The real secret to sustaining a creative life is not intensity, not talent, not even brilliance. It's endurance. It is the ability to persist through seasons of doubt, distraction, and discouragement. The book's title itself is both instruction and encouragement. Keep Going isn't about rushing or burning yourself out. It's about learning how to sustain your energy, how to protect your curiosity, and how to cultivate resilience so that your creativity survives the long journey of life. This is not the advice you often hear in a world obsessed with overnight success and viral moments, but is the advice that truly matters if you want to create a practice that lasts. Kleon emphasizes that keeping going doesn't mean always moving forward in a straight line. Life rarely works that way. There are detours, setbacks, and pauses along the path. Sometimes you will feel like you're circling back to the same problems again and again. But that's not failure. It's a natural rhythm of growth. Just like the seasons, creativity has cycles. There are times of blooming and abundance, and there are times of rest and quiet. Learning to honor these cycles rather than fight them is part of the wisdom Kleon offers. When the work feels heavy, instead of forcing yourself to sprint, maybe it's time to slow down, rest, and return refreshed. To keep going is not about blind force. It's about pacing yourself so you can endure. Another key lesson in this final message is that creativity is not separate from life. It is woven into it. Too often, we think of art or writing or music as things that must happen in special conditions, in studios or retreats, away from the mess of ordinary living. But Kleon reminds us that ordinary life itself is the soil from which creativity grows. Family, friendship, love, loss, laughter, boredom, these are the raw materials. Instead of wishing life were neater or quieter, we can embrace the mess as fuel for our work. Even the difficulties, the disappointments, and the failures can become sources of insight and expression if we let them. To keep going, then, means to keep living fully, paying attention to the richness of daily life, and allow it to feed your creative spirit. Kleon also insists on the importance of community. Creativity may feel like a solitary act, but it thrives in connection. Throughout history, artists have drawn strength from one another, whether in salons, workshops, or in formal circles of friends. Today, while it's easy to fall into isolation or comparison online, we can still choose to seek genuine community. This doesn't mean surrounding yourself with critics or competitors. It means finding people who encourage you, who understand the struggles, and who remind you why you started. When your energy fades, the right community can lift you up and help you keep going. And when you see others persist with their own challenges, you're reminded that endurance is possible for you too. A final and perhaps most tender lesson Kleon shares is that keeping going requires compassion for yourself and for others. Too often, we drive ourselves with harsh expectations. We punish ourselves for not being productive enough, not being original enough, not being successful enough. But cruelty doesn't sustain creativity. Kindness does. You cannot bully yourself into inspiration. What works is patience, gentleness, and self-respect. Some days, keeping going simply means forgiving yourself for not doing as much as you wanted and trying again tomorrow. Other days, it means celebrating small wins instead of criticizing imperfections. By treating yourself as you would a close friend, you create an environment where creativity can flourish instead of wither. Kleon's advice resonates so strongly because it is realistic. He doesn't pretend that creative lives are easy. He acknowledges the grind, the boredom, the discouragement, and the endless noise of the modern world. But instead of offering quick hacks or empty motivational slogans, he offers practices, repeatable, human, sustainable practices that help you survive the ups and downs. Build routines. Protect your bliss station. Do the verb, not the noun. Make gifts. Pay attention. Share honestly. Rest when you need to. Surround yourself with encouragement. Be kind to yourself. And above all, no matter what happens, keep going. When you think about it, the power of this message extends beyond creativity. It's advice for living. Whether you're an artist, a teacher, a parent, an entrepreneur, or simply someone trying to make sense of the world, the principle is the same. Persistence matters more than perfection. Showing up day after day with whatever you have to give, that is how progress happens. That is how lives are built. That is how meaning is made. So, as you listen to these lessons, remember that keep going is not a manual for quick success. It's a companion for the long road. It's a book you return to when you're tired, when you're lost, when you're unsure if you have anything left to give. And each time, its message is steady and clear. Don't stop. Don't give up. Don't measure your worth by fleeting recognition. Measure it by your willingness to return again and again to the act of creating, of noticing, of giving, of living. That persistence, quiet and steady, is what sustains you. In the end, Austin Kleon leaves us with a vision of creativity that is humble but enduring. It's not about being a genius or a prodigy. It's about being human, paying attention, making things, sharing them, and finding joy in the process. If you can do that, if you can simply keep going, then you will not only create meaningful work, but you will also build a meaningful life. And perhaps that is the greatest gift of all.